It's time for the Locals Only podcast with Dixon.
Sponsored by Syracuse Haulers.
What's up, everybody? We are back with another edition of the Locals Only podcast brought to you by Syracuse Haulers. I am Dixon, joined today by Kate Ellen and Steve from Faster Horses, who you've heard a multitude of times on Locals Only with In Between. They also are in the mix on our sister station and my baby, thesignalsyracuse.com. Thank you both so much for taking the time to do this tonight.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Totally. Thanks, Scott.
I've wanted to catch up with you guys since you dropped that single on me a while ago. It was not what I was expecting. So first, I mean, I want to address kind of like the elephant in the room. Like, Steve, you have a lot of music that you've touched that plays on both stations. Steve's a local producer, works with a multitude of artists, and man, like, thank you, especially for your work with Sydney and all of the other bands that you've put out. You make my job really, really easy because I don't have to do anything other than put it in the system.
Well, that's super kind. I appreciate that. It's definitely been fun. I've been recording bands in Syracuse since 2002. And Kate Ellen was actually one of the bands that I recorded when I first started doing it full time. So it's like a kind of a full circle moment to be writing and recording music with her now this many years later.
Well, that's question number 2 is how did you two come to be Faster Horses?
I had recorded her when she was in a local band called Jackson's Kid Summer back in probably 2008, maybe.
Even before then, I was like a total fangirl of Steve and had gone and seen Steve play like shows in his basement. And yeah, so like it predates us recording me for sure.
We had always said that, you know, that it would be awesome to make music together. Never really made it happen until I think it was like summer of 2014. We were just like, we need to do this. We need to set aside a week and just get together and write and see what happens. And that was the process. We actually went up to, my parents have a camp on Lake Champlain. So the two of us just went up there and for a week, just like wrote as much as we could, tried to see if we could find a common thread to work with, and ended up kind of landing on the beginnings of what became Faster Horses, and just have kind of refined it ever since.
Very cool. I want to jump back to something quick because it was an aha moment for me, but Jackson's Kid Summer, that's a name I haven't heard in a really long time.
Oh my God, Scott.
In my early days of having taken the Lost Horizon over in 2009, you guys played a couple of shows for me.
Yeah, we did.
I was a much larger human being and a lot scarier then.
Oh my God, that's well, yeah. We played the Lost Horizon a couple times. We played like all around. We were at Funkin' Waffles. We were at like, all those spots, the hot spots in Syracuse. And Steve actually really he kind of like took us under his wing and like helped us book all these shows and record our album. And yeah, and so like in some ways, like, I don't know, Steve sort of introduced me to the scene here. And sorry, my internet connection's unstable, by the way, guys. But yeah, so I'm like moving to a better location. But yeah, so Steve like really kind of like introduced me into the scene, and that's kind of how we found the Lost Horizon. And yeah, Jackson's Kid Summer was a whole thing.
Certainly was. You guys were the it band in Syracuse for a while.
Oh my God, that's so kind. Yeah, well, so I was in high school when that started, and I stayed in it through the beginning of college, and then we did some like light touring, and then we ended up kind of taking a little break. Everybody went their own ways, but I'm still in touch with the guys. They're wonderful, and the music is around. Like, people contact me about it, so yeah, it has legs.
Absolutely. And it's great to see it sort of persevere through the course of time. Now that we're actually back to like when we were young festival and Paramore putting out new music, right? Like everything's this weird cycle.
Oh my God, I know. It's so crazy. And even like Steve actually plays little known fact, Steve actually played drums on Sierra Sunshine, which was our album. And he was playing drums for us in lieu of a different drummer. And so, yeah, so this is kind of like it's a completely different genre and feel from all of that, but it was like the seeds were planted when we were in the studio for JKS.
Very cool. Well, I love the fact that like I say this a lot actually. I feel very lucky to be in a position where I've seen both of you uh progress through your musical sort of existence, right? Like I have probably the best seat in the house to watch the young talent of Central New York grow and blossom and evolve. And it wasn't until the last probably 5 years that I really came to understand that and really accept how cool that is, right? Like, and I've been able to do it for a really long time. And when you hear a project like Faster Horses, right, like it really does. And now that it connects the dots back with both of you for me, like it's this interesting perspective where like I have your musical journey in my head, right? So like I know where it began, I know where it is now. I've seen the things along the way. It makes me understand what could come in the future.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And it's been such a journey even for Steve and I. Like I think Steve mentioned, but we met up in like I keep thinking it was 2015, but it was 2014 when we first went up to Willsboro to not record, but just write. And that's almost 10 years ago. So we were like,
It took a very long time to get
yeah,
this music out.
it's so crazy. Yeah, and over time, like the songs have evolved. Like, we put together the general structure and we knew the story that we wanted to tell with the music. And then even just like year over year, we were like, oh, like actually maybe we should change this verse, or you should sing the melody instead of me, or we should change the lyrics here, like they don't make sense. And so we started like really, we've been able to play even within the project Faster Horses, like not even like looking at how we've both developed as musicians and as performers and writers over all this time, but like even within this project, there's been so much freedom to explore like what we want to do differently. And like we've both been pretty like open to evolving the music as we have been writing it. So it's really cool to see it finally being released because it's been a long time.
I'm excited. You've got a brand new song called Stay. It drops everywhere Friday, will be available. Is the third of 5 songs that will be released over the arc of time that will then encompass a physical release. But the only way you'll be able to get the physical release is in the future, which probably next year at some point.
Yeah, definitely. Once all 5 are out digitally, they'll all be kind of wrapped up in a cool physical package.
Very cool. Well, Stay will be on Locals Only this Sunday at 11. It'll be in the Locals Only Spotlight next week, all week at 6:05. I don't usually announce it that far out in advance, but here's what I'm going to say. I don't have words a lot of times, right? Like you guys have done something with what you've created with these songs that are beyond, I don't want to say description because then it just kind of sounds like hyperbole, but there's really something there that has such a charm and such a level of like comfort to it, right? Like while I've probably listened to Stay a half dozen times since I got it back after having major computer issues last week. But even the first couple of times through it, it still felt very familiar, right? Like you guys have such an approach to this that I think encompasses that listening experience for people that are really paying attention. I've gotten such great feedback from the single in its original run in the Locals Only Spotlight with In Between. As it's played more and more across the Signal Syracuse, people are starting to reach out and ask what it is. I actually had somebody send me a screenshot of a Shazam, which was really cool to
Oh
see
my
as
God,
well. And as much as I loved that song, like I've really, really fallen head over heels in love with Stay. There's just, again, there's a certain charm that you guys sort of embody. And my biggest question is this, and I don't mean it in a negative way at all, but everything that I've read as people have described you or you guys have described yourself is the word country has a tendency to be in there. But I don't hear country. I hear Americana. I hear like
Yeah,
roots music. And I think that was the confusing thing for me, because I remember when Steve reached out to me at first, he's like, I've got this acoustic country duo, and my brain immediately went, that doesn't add up. And then I heard it and I was like, oh, okay, this is great. But like I was stuck on that word country. And then, just diving through all of your social media, everything, seeing it pop up occasionally. Do you guys actually like have an inkling to be considered country in the context of what country music means to the person on the street, the music consumer?
I don't think necessarily, we fit in the umbrella of modern country, but I think for both Kate Ellen and I, who have these like influences that stem so far back into, kind of way more traditional country of yesteryear, just even more sort of just classic American songwriting. I think that's really where we're sort of absorbing that categorization of our music. Like I know Kate Allen has mentioned, somebody like Bonnie Raitt, and even in like a modern time, somebody like a Casey Musgraves. I think like those are things, those are projects that I think we definitely draw influence from and respect highly. So it was sort of a natural sort of place to put us, not really knowing where we fit, because I do think what we're doing is sort of different from most forms of modern music, so it was just an attempt to kind of find a lane. But yeah, I don't really have any reservations about being lumped into that. In that context, I don't necessarily think we fit with like bro country and the pickup trucks and all that, but it's beyond that. It's more about the the older.
Yeah, and Steve also plays, so there is banjo in between, if anybody's heard it. Scott, we know you've heard it. But Steve also, like throughout the journey of us writing this music and making it, Steve acquired a pedal steel guitar. Pedal steel guitar? Do you call it a pedal steel guitar?
Yes.
Yeah, and the pedal steel, I think, we actually laid down the pedal steel tracks last before we mixed the album. And when we added it, I think we were like, oh, this is like something different. And this feels maybe like there's some sort of country pull, or like within the instrumentation, it was like there's something there that like we can't deny. Like this is like adding a definite country twang. Like there's something happening there. But to your point, Scott, we were like flummoxed. Of like both of us were like, what are we doing? We're just trying to make something good. Like, is good a genre? We hope we fall into that.
Well, if you look at like radio artists in the alternative world starting 09, 2010, right? Whether you're talking about like Mumford and Sons, the Lumineers, or even when you get a little bit more abstract than that and head towards things like Mount Joy or Camp, there's a distinct American roots music vibe to it that I think lends itself well to what you guys do. While I still hear little elements of like Murder by Death and even Real Friends occasionally here, just with the choice of the sounds, right? Like it's so cool to me because it encompasses so much, but like it's like, I don't know, it's like grandmother food, right? Like it's so simple, but it's so perfect, but nobody understands that like that simple dish still took all day to make. It just seems simple because there's so few things. It's what goes into it that makes it what it is. I put like Faster Horses in that same category as like your favorite dish from your grandmother.
I mean, that's such a high compliment, and I think that that's exactly kind of what we were going for. Like even the name Faster Horses was a nod to that Henry Ford quote that, if I gave the people what they want, I would have built faster horses. It's, we're not trying to reinvent a wheel and do this like incredibly like out there, way outside of the box thing. It's just more, trying to put our own take on something, homespun and kind of near and dear to us, in a way that hopefully translates in exactly like what you were saying, like that sort of home style, seemingly simple dish, but it it's been considered, and it's generations of that recipe being passed down. So that's kind of a good metaphor for what we're
Totally.
trying to do.
Yeah. And Scott, like we almost, I mean, there was like a day when we almost went off the rails and made this entire thing like an R&B project with like a crazy like organ part that was like, so this is really, I mean, to Steve's point, it's been iterations of working on it, and then when we finally kind of landed on the sound. And like what's cool is like if you, I mean, I don't know if anyone will hear it, but some of the, the acoustic guitar tracks that are behind, they're sort of like the backbone of the songs, like they're like the demo tracks that Steve like literally recorded as like a demo, and we never thought we would use them in the original tracks. And then just push came to shove and they sounded exactly like what we wanted. So there's been like, a lot of consideration.
It's been a weird exercise in limitation, I think. Just what should this be like? Is this cool enough? Like not overthinking it, not over manicuring it, and just like keeping it keeping it limited to just exactly what we thought the songs needed, and no more.
Well, you ride this very strange almost juxtaposition with the record, right? Like where everything, despite how again minimal it seems, still creates like this really lush atmosphere. Like there's a genuine feel to it that has this sort of like velvety texture to it, for no better way to put it. But then, like Kate Allen mentioned, you used the rough tracks of the acoustic guitar that gave it like these little sharp, raw elements that brought it to life. And there was obviously magic in that scratch take or demo or whatever it was, because there's sometimes when you're very early on with a piece of art, there's a sense of urgency to alleviate sort of like your soul of just
100%.
right. So like that first take, well, in who knows, maybe you can play it better now, right? But who cares? The moment was what was special, and you captured it and you used it in the best possible way. And the choices you make, in my opinion, are a lot of times way more important than the sounds you can get or the way you can manipulate them.
Totally. Well, yeah, I think for me personally, making records every day, this was the first time I've actually had the choice, the chance to like work on something, without an expectation of like what it needs to be, and without a deadline, and without having to deliver something that meets a certain level of perfection or whatever. And so the idea of being able to embrace sort of like the human side of what we're doing was a really big part of, because the story itself is human, the lyrics are human. It's a breakup record. So like being able to to embrace kind of like the grittiness and imperfections of like human performance as sort of a companion to the message was an important thing for us to be able to do. And I think it's cool that you pick up on it, and I definitely appreciate the way you're describing it, because it's cool to hear.
Well, I just kind of like I've over the course of time, and I know you fall into this too, man, because we all kind of came up in the same scene, right? Like where you're just sort of like pigeonholed, because I was always a heavily tattooed guy that did security at the hardcore shows, that I was obviously like strictly a hardcore kid. Or a lot of people have this weird misconception that I'm a metal guy, and I don't like it really that much at all. There's a few certain things, right? I've always been really drawn to like very honest and very real music. And my early years were filled with nothing but Motown and Stax record stuff, because of the area in Syracuse that I grew up. I grew up in a predominantly African American and Latino neighborhood for the majority of my formative years. So that's my musical backbone, because that's what I was always around. And then over time, right, like you just learn to not say things like guilty pleasures, right? Like when
Right.
it comes to art, it's subjective. You like what you like, and there's nothing guilty about liking a piece of art, right? Like I can't even, I almost bagged on Machine Gun Kelly again there for like the third day in a row, and I'm gonna pull myself back from that. But like everybody that's out there doing this, regardless of what everybody's opinion is, if it's appealing to a certain crowd, it's obviously achieving its goal. So like I gave up on caring about like throwing myself wholly into just accepting the fact that I'm going to let music affect me in the way that it affects me. And I'm fortunate enough to have a career where I get to express that to the artist sometimes, but to the general public, right? Like it's almost like I got hired as a pitch man for new alternative music on the radio. I love that that gets to encompass some unsigned and local talent like yourselves. And it gives me hope, right? That like maybe more people can come to that mindset and just let go of all the preconceived garbage that we hold on to for the sake of appearances, right? Like it's the social
Yeah.
media age and I get it, but like, yeah, art is
Oh,
art and it moves people in certain ways. And I can tell you straight up that you guys are on a path right now that should, you know, if given the opportunity to affect an awful lot of people, there's something very special about this project and the music that you're releasing. And I really, really think that there's a huge future for what you're doing. And I can't wait to hear the fourth and fifth tracks and then what comes next, because I'm very, very excited about the space that you've kind of created for yourselves. And while we've mentioned things like Mumford and Sons and the Lumineers, you know, I think there's space in like that Iron and Wine category, right? Like
Yeah.
I can hear you guys pretty much playing with anybody. And to me, that speaks volumes about the potential appeal of an artist. And for me, like I've played it for my wife who loves that style of music in general, and she's fallen in love with it. Like there's a couple of people, Zanetta, who's also on the signal with me that does weekends on 95X, has mentioned without prompting, right? Like how much she really dug the song and looked you guys up and found everything that you've released. It has that effect when it hits the right person, and I'm excited for it to hit a much larger audience.
oh,
Well,
Scott, that's
yeah,
so
thank you.
nice. I know, and like Steve and I, we're like such hermits. We're like the hermit crabs. Like we're kind of weird about social media, and we don't know how to get like promo pics. And like one time, someone took pictures of us, and it was horrible. And we were just like, we don't know
We're
how to do
behind the
this.
scenes people.
And we've been like hiding these, I mean, not hiding them, but like keeping them to ourselves for like literally almost 10 years. So it's like, I remember when we finished, we were like listening to the, you know, the burned CD in the car, like just to see how it sounded in the car on the way home. And Steve was like going to drop me off at my parents' house. And we were both like, oh my God, like it's it. Like, are we going to let anyone listen to this? Like, should we? We're like, are we bad? Like, are we good? We can't even tell. We're like, we've been in this world for like, you know, years listening to it, being the only people who've listened to it. So Steve wouldn't even let me show my dad for like years. So
Well,
it's
it's weird, right? Because every situation like that, there's two perspectives. You're either looking in from outside the bottle or you're seeing the bottle from the outside. And you guys
yeah,
had spent so much time in the bottle that you had no
Yeah.
perspective of what was going on, you
totally,
know, the 360 degrees around that bottle. And
totally.
I enjoy hearing stories like that, right? Because like in my opinion, this is one of the coolest things that's come out of Syracuse in at least a half decade, if not a decade. It's
Thank you.
interesting, it's charming, it's everything that you want, especially this time of year, right? Like this is just like the perfect soundtrack to fall in upstate New York. Um,
It was written in the fall. It was written in upstate
Yeah.
New York in the fall.
yeah.
Like this is like we were just outside, like under a bunch of pine trees, like singing these songs. Like, and meanwhile, I was like crying in the background because this is all this breakup that I went through. But it was like a big. That's a really insightful thought.
Well, here's a question I'm going to ask, right? Because we all kind of come from, again, that same sort of scene.
Yeah.
Is to me, and I don't mean this because I know the word has taken on a completely different meaning over the course of the last 15 years, but there is a certain emo quality to the record, but in a real friend's way, not a, you know, My Chemical Romance kind of way. And I love that about this, right? Because like that was ultimately what all of those early incarnations of the and I have such a hard time like coming up with names off the top of my head, but there was like a few bands that got really big doing very emotional, not necessarily hardcore music for hardcore kids.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where like I hear it and now it makes way more sense to me right? Knowing the both of you in the backstory now. Again, there's so much appeal here to such an array of people, and we just got to get people to listen to it.
Well, we appreciate the help that you're offering here. It's awesome to be able to have the opportunity to put it in front of you and have you do your thing with it. So we're super appreciative of it.
Well, we appreciate you continuing to fight the good fight and be an independent artist, and for all that you do for our local music scene, whether you understand or not how good you make us look outside of Syracuse with some of these recordings. Man, it's an absolute pleasure to see you thriving right now. And man, I'll say this because it's the truth. I've never heard a negative word ever said. And you know how the Syracuse music scene is, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's always like a glowing review of Steve, and that's gone a long way with me. I'm glad our paths finally crossed.
Yes.
Kate Ellen, can't thank you enough for initiating all of this and getting us into this space. And I will end with Stay is released Friday, which in the time that this comes out will be tomorrow. Comes out tomorrow across all platforms. Debuts on Locals Only Sunday at 11. You'll hear it all week at 6:05 next week in the Locals Only Spotlight. Kate Allen, I know you're in New York City. Steve, you're obviously here in Syracuse. Will there be an opportunity at some point in the not so distant future, let's say the next half year, where we may be able to see a live performance of some of these songs?
It'll be
I
like
really
Steve and-
hope so.
Yeah, it'll be like Steve and I with blankets over our heads. So you guys will like see us, but we'll be hiding a little bit. That's how we are. We're like a top secret band, but
We would love to. We would love
Yeah.
to get that going. I think, both, like, part of the reason this album has taken so long is because both of us, we're in the same city like twice a year. So it's hard to like make those things happen on a regular, but we always talk about it, and it's something that is a high priority for us. So even if it's only a few times a year, I think you can probably count on us getting out there and doing something.
Very cool. Well, you have 100% assurance that both stations will back it completely. Once the new single Stay cycles through its week in the Locals Only Spotlight, you'll also start to hear it on the Signal Syracuse, along with In Between, joining a plethora of local artists in our mix every day, including a lot of records that Steve has produced from Sydney Irving, and then some heavy hitters like Mike Powell in the mix, Gary Carpentier as well. It's been an absolute pleasure catching up with the two of you, and I cannot wait for song number 4 and song number 5 early next year. Faster Horses across all social platforms, and you've got the YouTube up as well. I love the artwork for the videos. It's very fitting. So spend some time with their music, fall in love with them the way I have, and hopefully sometime early 2023, we can get them up here live, and we'll all hang out together.